Hello and welcome to a new series of Inside Out Northwest with me, Diane Oxberry. Tonight, we reveal why we've not seen the last of extreme storms, record rainfall and severe flooding.
This could well happen again. Could be a long way down the line, or it could be next year.
And we ask, who pays when flood defences fail?
I've worked hard all my life. I've raised 2 kids on my own, and I'm now having to rely on the generosity of others because I couldn't get insurance.
It's been a dreadful Christmas and New Year for many people in the Northwest. Extreme weather has caused havoc in our region. Many businesses and families are just starting to recover after record amounts of rainfall caused widespread flooding. I have been reflecting this unprecedented weather in the forecasts on Northwest tonight, and it does seem to me at least that the frequency of these storms is increasing. So the critical question is, will we continue to see more, and who'll be affected next? The situation is still very, very difficult. Just to remind you, 7 severe flood warnings, which means there could be potential danger to life, are still in force across the northwest of England. You can see through parts of Cumbria and in particular parts of Lancashire. That is where the heaviest of the rain has been.
The floor from the living room, it just like erupted like a little volcano, and then within seconds it was up to fireplace.
Absolutely devastating. There are more houses flooded than there has ever been flooded.
The water level's rising as we're standing here now. It's up to about 2 foot at the moment and getting higher.
The extraordinary levels that we've seen, record-breaking river levels now across Lancashire, has just overwhelmed even the temporary defences.
Rain, rain and more rain. The floods just a few weeks ago. These pictures look like more of the same, but in fact, they were taken 3 years ago when I first sat down with Met Office expert Alan Goodman to discuss the impact of extreme weather in our region. It's depressing looking back. It's such a washout, isn't it?
Most parts of the northwest more than double the average rainfall, amounts of rain in an hour that were far too much for the drains to cope with, so roads became rivers.
Since 2012, the extreme weather patterns have been getting worse. According to the Met Office, December was the wettest month for the UK in more than a century. So Alan, here we are, back again, looking at significant disruptive flooding. Last time we did it was the dreadful summer of 2012. And here we are again, winter 2015. And these scenes are unprecedented, aren't they?
Certainly, Rochdale town centre, water streaming through the roads. December 2015 was an exceptional month. We may not see the like of it again. Very, very difficult to forecast, although the Met Office did in their longer range outlook point towards a milder, wetter, stormier than average December. But obviously this was really very, very serious indeed.
The Met Office says there is a direct link between the warmth and the record rains in our region. It believes storms propelled by the jet stream were mainly to blame, with contributions from the El Niño weather phenomenon and man-made climate change. The critical thing is it has been so mild, and it's that mild air that is part of the problem, isn't it?
Absolutely. The milder the air, the more moisture it can contain. Now, people will think, well, wait a minute, is climate change playing any role in this? Climate change has probably played a small role in it. We know now, we've had research, for example, that demonstrates that, given all the greenhouse gases that are now in the atmosphere compared to, say, pre-industrial times, we are now several times more likely to get these sort of periods of extended, intense winter rainfall than we were, say, in the 19th century.
This means that some people have been flooded more than once. I last came to Croston back in 2012 after the serious flooding then. The residents had actually been flooded twice. They just returned back to their beautifully renovated homes to resume their lives. And guess what? Fast forward, December 2015. It's happened again. This is like turning back time, coming back into your house.
Yeah,
I'm glad to see you again, but not under these circumstances, Dale.
Honestly, last time you were just back in, it was cosy, it was perfect, it had been renovated. It must break your heart.
We've spent a time just getting it right, and the 3 years we've been, we thought it was perfect, and then gone again.
What was it like when it started to come back in again?
It was so fast this time. It was a real big surge of water that came in. We'd less than an hour, really, from it trickling down the road to it coming to about nearly a metre full in the house. So it was very fast.
And you're not inexperienced with dealing with this event, are you?
Not at all. This is our third time in this property that we've been flooded. Since 87, 2012 and now this time.
But the absolute irony for Croston is you had fought so hard and you had got the money for your flood defences.
We had indeed. We'd got a flood action group and we lobbied successfully for a barrier to be built in north of Croston that's going to hold the flood water back. We had to fight hard for it. At one time, the government was suggesting that the shortfall of money had to be levied on the people of Croston, but we fought against that, and eventually they've coughed up the money, and it's underway, hoping to be ready in May, but I would think it'll now be summer now before it's ready. But once that's in, we're hoping that's going to cure all our ills.
But that's the irony. You were almost there, you know, 6 months down the line, and hopefully this wouldn't have happened.
It wouldn't have happened, it wouldn't have, but that's the way it is, and you've got to be stoic and sort of say, that's Crostoners, we have to live with it. We might not have to live with it after next summer.
Nearly 300 properties were flooded in Croston. And while John is optimistic the new defence system would have helped, he also believes that plans to build new homes on floodplains are part of the problem.
The amount of development that's gone on means that water gets straight in within an hour or two of falling off all the roofs and the roads and the footpaths and the concreted gardens, and it goes straight into the river and comes down.
The Met Office says storms Desmond, Eva and Frank were behind the record rainfall. And whilst their long-term forecasts had correctly warned about the severe impact, possibly even to life, people weren't prepared for such freak weather. So, while the floods were all too familiar to people like John in Croston, to others they came as a nasty surprise. People can't live their lives like this, can they?
No, they can't. And,
Councillor Terry Hill is the former chair of planning for the Ribble Valley. He lives in Whalley, which also flooded on Boxing Day. The river still fairly lively at this point, Terry, but I bet nothing on what it was on the day of the floods.
The day of the flood, it got over into that big field there because that is a floodplain.
Yes.
But this time it was into those houses over there, the farmhouses and farm buildings, which has never happened in 60 years, apparently. In the middle of it was this raging torrent. When it rages over there, it is like Niagara Falls. And then it was over here, so it came over this wall, washed away lots of the banking down there, and then flooded down there.
Alan, I feel like I'm standing on a riverbank, but I'm not. This was your garden.
It was my garden, yeah.
And this was your garden?
That
your
was my
lawn?
garden, right down to the willow trees down there.
Alan Elliott was away for Christmas when the flood struck. Although he lives on the bank of the river, his house had never flooded. His son rang him to break the bad news.
He said to me, Dad, I've got some bad news for you here. He said the house can be put right. He said that unbelievable, the banking is all gone, all your garden's gone. I said, what do you mean the garden's gone? I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. You know, garden's gone? What do you mean? Just gone, the river's taken your garden. We came back more straight away and I couldn't believe what I've seen. You know, it was devastating to see it like that.
At the end of the day though, when the rain falls from the sky, is it just an act of God? Does it fall under that category?
Well, it is an act of God in some respects, isn't it? Then what can you do? You can't. Climate change or anything, you can't do a lot about it, can you? Not with water like that. It came down this river. You can't do anything much about it. You can put flood defences in, you can do all that, and you will protect it to a certain degree. But if it doesn't stop raining for 3 to 4 weeks heavy, you'll not stop anything. You've had it.
The impacts were in accordance with what was expected, but it's frightening, the raw power of nature. It doesn't happen very often in this relatively temperate climate of ours, but when it does happen, yes, I think it wakes you up, makes you realise who's in charge.
Oh,
So we can still see the evidence all around. You've got sandbags, you've got skips.
Yeah.
It's still all here.
Oh yeah, it'll take probably now to clear everybody's house out, you know, several weeks if not months, because they were inundated and they need a long time to dry out. And that's been one of the issues. Where do people go?
Andy and Claire Davis had just finished renovating their house when the river came racing into it. You still look like you're at 6s and 7s, but actually you have moved mountains already, haven't you, Claire?
We have. We've done quite a lot. We've managed to clear everything out of the house. We've done a lot of work on the garden. We've had some help from some neighbours who brought a digger down, and they moved 15 tonnes of sand and silt off the lawn already for us.
15 tonnes?
15 tonnes. And as you can see, there's still quite a lot there.
The community even built the road back. There was no road,
Yeah.
so we couldn't actually come to our home because there was no road left.
Yeah.
So somebody brought the little machine and they flattened it all.
Sorted
and
that,
brought
because we'd
us
still
in.
probably be waiting for that
Yeah.
if we'd have had to go through authorities.
But the bad news keeps on coming because your beloved camper van.
Yeah, that's just been written off today. So that's another tragedy for us. And then obviously the house as well that we've got to start working on, that we'd just finished a new extension. It was just being signed off. So.
Did you ever imagine that this could happen to you?
I suppose deep down you can expect it living so close to the river, but you never fully expect it to come so deep within your house. Yeah, it's a tragedy.
I mean, what are you? 30 feet from the flood defence, from the wall out there?
Yeah.
And it came over the top?
Yeah,
Yeah.
way over the top, yeah. You can see the level it came to in here, it was about here, so just waist high.
We were expecting the weather to be bad. I don't think anyone envisaged it was going to be so...
So horrendous,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
it
kept
was-
coming.
Next time it rains, can they expect that river to overtop flood defences and come into their front room and for there to be water this high in their homes? Should that be their expectation?
Depends what's gone before. When we look back at Boxing Day 2015, the ground was already in a pretty sodden state from previous events. So it didn't take much to induce a very rapid response from the surrounding rivers, which is what we got, unfortunately. And the ground is still very, very wet and very sensitive to further rainfall. So what we really need is actually some colder weather, because that generally implies drier conditions. We need a good few weeks where drier than average weather, which will allow the water to sink through and get us back to what would be an average ground state.
On the day of the floods, a tweet of an advertising board announcing a new housing development in Whalley began to trend. Ironically, the sign was partly submerged in a flooded field. Do you still see a future here? Like John in Croston, Claire believes that developing on floodplains is part of the problem.
I think just the one thing that we'd like them to relook at possibly would be the amount of houses they're building around the village, because obviously living so near water, the more fields they take away for housing estates, the less drainage we've got, and that's got to be a contributing factor, because that's probably been the single
the runoff
most
of water.
thing that's changed since we've lived here, is that the village has grown and grown.
But what about building on floodplains? Because we know applications go in, sometimes they're granted. Why is that allowed? Why is that even considered a half-decent idea?
I honestly think that goes too far sometimes. But we are short of land for building. The government was insistent in Ribble Valley's case that planning applications had to be approved because we didn't have a 5-year supply. And then we are absolutely then dependent on the Environment Agency. Sometimes the Environment Agency will refuse straight from day one and say, no, we don't accept that you can build on there. That does happen.
The Environment Agency says the rain in Whalley and Croston was unprecedented, but that, nevertheless, it does consider flood risks when assessing new developments.
The Environment Agency is consulted by the local planning authorities who make decisions on housing developments, where we consider the risks, and we consider the risks very carefully in terms of both the risk of the flooding to the future development, but also could they increase the risk to other communities. we will object where we don't think those risks can be adequately managed. More than 98% of the time now, when we object, the local authority supports our objection. So we don't want to see new homes being flooded.
What everyone does agree on is the need to work together more effectively to recognise the impact of recurring extreme weather to prevent such flooding happening again.
If a flood doesn't occur for 10, 15 years, like the Somerset levels, then I suppose government is tempted and local authorities are tempted to believe that they can reduce spending on those kind of issues, and then it comes back to bite you. So that has to change, that's for sure.
If we're going to see this slow but inexorable warming over the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, then it just means that the atmosphere, when we do get these particularly bad, unfavourable weather patterns developing, we're going to get that bit more rain coming out from each individual event. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. There will be, the weather we saw in December 2015 could occur again. I think when we're planning for long-term in building and planning flood defences, we have to think along the lines that this could well happen again. Could be a long way down the line, or it could be next year. Who knows?
Meanwhile, hundreds of people remain homeless, unable to move back into their homes for months because of flood damage. But their optimism and determination to rebuild their communities is keeping their spirits alive.
I still love it here, it's a lovely spot.
It's not put you off?
Not really, no.
2015, is it a year that you've really been glad to put behind you?
I am now. I really enjoyed it up to Christmas, and then it went wrong. Let's hope 2016 is going to be really great to have.
So, what happens if you're flooded but you don't have any insurance? Last month, Storm Desmond wreaked havoc in parts of Cumbria, and the BBC's Danny Savage was there as the water surged into thousands of homes and businesses. Many affected weren't insured. They simply can't afford the premiums that were demanded in the wake of previous floods. And as Danny found out, a scheme that promises to put that right already has its doubters.
It's absolutely horrible, watching the inevitable happen, basically. The water rose so very quickly.
It's a mess, it's a trauma, it's the upset, it's the fact that it goes on for months and, it seems to be never ending.
And you sit there and think, I can't go through this again. It is just the most awful emotional strain. I'm going to cry.
Well, here we are, repeat of 2009. Just 5 foot in water in the house at the moment, but sat up here in the dark, candlelight with my little dog. I'm just going to make a cup of tea because I've got my camping stove there ready. You can just see that. And fortunately, this time, no insurance. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Couches have gone, kitchen's gone. All the utilities have gone. Just hope the boiler doesn't get it because that's very expensive. Gonna have to do quite a bit of overtime next year, I think. So, all that work for the flood defences and they didn't work. Unbelievable.
Across the county, the flooding is unstoppable.
So that's your back garden, completely underwater?
Yeah. So in the house further down, it's probably about a metre. It's over a metre, I would say.
Daylight. A flood of biblical proportions.
My grand's stuck in there. She's 94, nearly 95. And this will be the second time now that it's happened, so I just want her out.
Roads have been washed away. This is the A591, the main link between Ambleside and Keswick. And by the end of the weekend, questions are mounting.
We were told that it was going to be, after these defences, it was a once in a 250-year event. And here we are 10 years later, £38 million, and 10 years later, a bit of a waste of money, I think.
Are you angry, or do you...
Very angry, very angry. I feel that we've been fed a bit of false information, I think.
And in Cockermouth, Sue is still trapped upstairs.
This is night 2. Been here for 30 hours now. Hoping tomorrow that the water's low enough that I can get out. Pretty devastating everywhere from what we can gather. I've had no contact with my parents, I don't know if they're alright. Phone died 6 o'clock this morning, so I've had no contact with anybody. Been talking to my neighbours through the window, but that's about it.
So is it possible to protect the county from the impact of heavy rain? £38 million was spent building flood defences in Carlisle after the 2005 floods. £6 million was spent in Keswick and £4.4 million in Cockermouth. All failed to stop flooding, and 51 flood defence schemes in Cumbria and the North West await funding. In Kendal, there's pressure to reinstate some of those abandoned schemes.
There's one for the River Kent just down the road from here, which is on the shelf, which they could just take off and fund. They could do that almost right away. But there'll be other schemes that could be drawn up to prevent this kind of thing happening again. And this is obviously a level of something we're going to have to expect again in the future, in which case it saves money and a lot of grief if we can prevent it through proper flood defence schemes.
And in Cockermouth, Sue's finally been able to leave her bedroom, and upset has turned to anger.
I've spent the last 10 days cleaning 2 houses because my parents have been flooded as well. I don't have insurance, so it's about salvaging this house as best I can. And today is the first day I've really had any time to sit down and reflect. But I feel angry. I really do feel angry. I've worked hard all my life. I've raised 2 kids on my own, and I'm now having to rely on the generosity of others because I couldn't get insurance. You know, I've lost quite a lot, really.
And sadly for Sue, an insurance scheme that could have helped will arrive 4 months too late.
This floodery has been out there for 2 years now. It's not been signed off by Prudential yet. I'm not convinced, we don't know any detail until I see it on the table and we say it's a definite, it's signed off. I'm not convinced.
For many, insurance has been unaffordable because it was just too expensive. So after the floods in the south of England back in 2014, the industry came up with a new scheme so that people living in homes in areas at risk of flooding could get the cover they needed. It's called Flood Re.
Well, I think Flood Re is a really positive thing, and it's the only positive thing that I think flood victims can hold on to.
Mary Donno's advised the insurance industry on the creation of Flood Re. It'll start in April and should guarantee every homeowner access to insurance.
It's really based on affordability, so it's a way of getting affordable, fairly priced flood insurance.
I've talked to people whose excess is going to be more than 10, perhaps 15, 20,000 pounds. This is good news for them, yes?
It's excellent news for them, and I think it's the light at the end of the tunnel, really, for people that have been flooded, because I've talked to so many people who live in fear of being flooded again, not knowing how they're going to afford their excess and their premiums. This way, people will be able to afford flood insurance. It will be guaranteed for those at high risk, but only houses that have been built before 2009.
But it will come too late for people flooded this winter.
This has been talked about for 3 years, but it still hasn't come into effect. And look what's happened in the meantime. Why has it taken so long?
Flood Re is a complex thing, from the systems build that we require and that insurers require, from getting legislation through government to getting regulatory approval from the financial regulators. This is something that's complex and necessarily takes a long time.
But as we've heard, the scheme doesn't apply to properties built after 2009. And earlier this month, MPs raised concerns that it doesn't apply to some businesses. The Prime Minister has promised to investigate.
We are looking very carefully at this scheme, particularly on the issue of the businesses. What we've heard so far is a number of anecdotal stories about small businesses saying it's going to be very difficult to get insurance. Meanwhile, the insurance companies are telling us they won't turn down any small businesses. So we need to get to the bottom of this, absolutely key, before we get the final introduction of Flood Re in April this year.
So the new scheme requires a home to be in a recognised flood area on a map, like this one drawn up by the Environment Agency. Now it shows areas which are at risk of flooding and which areas have been protected to reduce the risk of flooding. The agency maps are used by a commercial organisation which passes them on to the people running Flood Re. So the maps have to be up to date and accurate. But as I found out, that's not always the case. Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
Hello, Danny from the BBC.
Hi,
Hello.
nice to see you.
Lynn runs a B&B in Keswick and has been flooded 3 times in 10 years. She had insurance, but still faces a huge bill.
If you look at the maps which are actually online...
And to rub salt into the wound, Lynn was paying a higher premium than she needed to because the Environment Agency map on which her insurance was based was wrong.
They had our flood risk as being higher than it actually should have been. And that applies to probably 100 houses here.
And the consequence of that?
And the consequence of that is that a lot of people couldn't afford insurance for flooding and didn't take out flood insurance cover, and now they've lost everything and they're devastated.
After talking to many people in Cumbria, I went to see the Environment Agency to get some answers.
Flood Re is due to come into effect this year. It will be using information from your maps. Isn't it vital then that your maps are spot on for future reference?
So it is a complex issue. We will continue to evolve and finesse this. Whether we ever get to an absolute perfect point, I actually doubt, because I think the rivers, the types of events that we're expecting to see with as our climate changes, means that this will continue to evolve. There are some real focal points now following the recent events, and those will act as our priority areas at the moment to focus on.
It's been a catastrophic month for Cumbria. Can you give people there any reassurance about the future?
I think the reassurance we can give is that we'll continue to work really hard with partners and with communities to do whatever we can to reduce the risk of flooding and the impacts of flooding. So we need to continue to work with those communities through all year round, and not just be seen to be turning up when it's raining.
But it's all too late for the thousands caught out in the last month. After Desmond came Eva, bringing more rain to the north and more heartache. The government has promised £50 million of emergency funds for families and businesses struggling to get back on their feet across Cumbria and Lancashire, and £40 million to repair roads and bridges. But there's no word yet on money for new flood defences.
Well, that's it from a very wet northwest. From here onward, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it might be dry. See you next week. Goodbye. Next week, a year after his heart attack on stage during Phoenix Nights, comedian Ted Robbins returns to the hospital that saved his life.
We're very, very lucky to be here today. Definitely, because there's a lot of people that go through that and they don't come back from it.